Hello, Anna. How are you this morning?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Yes, I'm very well. I'm much more cheerful than not last week, for sure. I'm sort
Good.
of laughing a lot more, which is a great thing.
Yeah.
And we're having jokes about microphones, aren't we?
Well, it's hard to miss, really. So don't start that.
Um, so, which is a great topic because, these things that give us relief are actually hard to miss.
Right. And a good giggle is always good, right? It's good
And a good
tonic.
giggle, yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
there's lots of examples out there that if you actually just realize that they're there, it just
You know,
changes that mindset.
it's funny because when people talk about mental health, they're nearly never talking about mental health. They're talking about mental ill health, right? So mental health has become the term for health. And when I talk to my clients, I think there's three things that are good signs of good mental health. One is that you can skip, sing, and dance. And
I
when
can't
you're
do any of
very,
them. I can't do any of them.
yes, you can. Anybody can do any of them. You don't have to be good at it.
Ah,
But when you're broken inside and you're just on your knees, like metaphorically, you can't sing. You can't sing, right? You don't want to dance, and I heard you don't want to skip down the street. But if you can do any of those things, like belly laughing, isn't that a good sign? And if you see on social media now, which I know you're not so much into, but people are talking about dancing around the kitchen, singing in the shower. What songs do they like? That is a sign of good mental health. That's what we should be talking about.
but I mean, where's this distinction between are you doing it to avoid or to deny, or I mean, is there a sort of a dynamic there?
Well,
You know that you're avoiding your problems, or not really.
I can't be sure. I think if you're properly belly laughing,
Yeah,
it's not a distraction. It's so physical. If you're going and yeah, of course, you're just
yeah.
making it up and it's not real. I think there is a distinction, and I think maybe maybe drinking 3 bottles of wine is a way of distracting. Talking about other people all the time, that's a way of distracting yourself from yourself, which I know we touched on last week. I think that's going to be a massive issue. I think the two big mental health issues, ill health issues that are coming will be chronic trauma for those that are on the front line. And I don't mean just healthcare workers, I mean people in the supermarkets dealing with stressed people, feeling like they're under threat but still going to work. There's lots of different frontline staff. I think we need to look after them in the long term, and the healthcare workers. And then I think there's going to be another kind of chronic trauma, which is those people that have been forced to slow down. They meet themselves and the bits that they're not keen on, that they can't distract from. And I think there will be, chronic trauma being a slow to build trauma. So acute trauma is where there's like a one-off event, like a bomb blast, a natural disaster, a car accident, a sudden, shocking, overwhelming event. That's not that won't happen, right? There will be people that will have that experience during this time, but I think the thing that will be epidemic and pandemic proportions will be chronic trauma, like knowing that they're facing something difficult consistently for months on end. That's going to break some people, unfortunately. I think there's a lot to do about that subject, much
Uh,
more.
and and knowing that there are these things like skipping, like dancing, like laughing, which they can tap into at any time, is a great
Yeah.
way for them to realize that actually, even with this chronic a dripping of trauma that is happening, that's way of releasing the pressure.
Well, I think more importantly, if you can't have those for some reason, it's a sign of you're getting full and the stress is becoming too much.
Mm.
So you can't force it, you can't necessarily use it as a preventative, but it's a very, very good sign. Um, for instance, if I'm at a funeral, I do not understand why they ask us to sing, right? Because my heart is usually in my throat. I can't sing. I don't want to sing either. Now, some people, that's a great way of them releasing and celebrating and honouring somebody. The sadness for me takes over. And so that's a sign to me that I'm in distress, I'm incredibly sad, my voice is gone. So in a way, if you lose that buoyancy in your step, the ability to sing in the shower, the belly laughing, or even the smiling, which is why my book's called that, will I smile again? People say that, will I ever smile again? Because they're so overwhelmed, it's gone.
So what did you do to come out of that? Could you give us some kind of,
what when
when
I couldn't do those things?
Yeah.
What I did to come out of it was I had to look at what was truly in the way of what broke me. And partly that was how I was thinking about myself. So an external thing happened to me, completely broke my spirit. But then I kind of turned against myself, which I think is what's going to be happening for people. So if you notice that your internal narrative is that you're swearing at yourself, you're demeaning yourself, you're an effing idiot, you're not companionable. So the way that I found, and now my methodology with working with other people, is to speed up recovery, is to help them build a companionable relationship with themselves. Now, that is why we're going to end up with an epidemic of mental ill health, because we're not taught companionability to self. Culturally, the pervasive culture is it's really good to denigrate oneself, demean oneself, right? That's what we do, because to be one's own best mate and big ourselves up has been confused with arrogance. So we haven't got that nuance right. So unfortunately, by the time people are leaving school, they're now led into a world where it's quite good to demean yourself, right? It's self-hatred is a silent epidemic, if not pandemic. I mean, it's absolutely pervasive, and I think it's so big we can't see it. So that's what got me through, and that's now what is integral to my work. People do not recover from breakdown if they still have so much inner brutality, so much self-hatred. They just cannot recover with that. But if you deal with that, then the chronic trauma starts to recalibrate slowly,
Dissipates,
incrementally.
does it?
Incrementally, yeah, it does. You can see it. And I've
It's
also
like the
seen
cloud kind of just a bit like The Simpsons, when sort of the cloud disappears and then you come out of the clouds.
and one of the things in this pandemic that concerns me, one of the many things that concerns me, is that people are already punishing themselves for how badly they're managing it, right? And I know we touched on this last time. Where's the companionability there? It's going to make it so much harder. So you've got the chronic trauma, you've got the chronically stressful situation. Let's say it's going to be 3 months, or let's say 3 months. So every day you're faced with a stress for 3 months. But then you start punishing yourself in parallel to that. You've got the actual threat of the pandemic and what that means, which is so many things, not just the threat of the virus. And then you've got that person punishing themselves for how they're reacting to it. So what inadvertently happens is the person's own psyche is further traumatizing oneself, right? So you end up having two threats in parallel. So in terms of recovery, you have to deal with both. People need to be helped to get their finances in order, to survive enough to actually get their finances in order, to get their emotional world in order, to look after their children, to, you know, all of those things that this is affecting. But they've got to do that by also becoming their own best mate. They're doing the best they can. Yeah. So that's how chronic trauma becomes so much worse, because you poison yourself with your own internal narrative, which is chronically traumatizing. So when I'm doing post-trauma work with somebody, you've got to do both in parallel. You've got to work on what's actually happening or what happened in the incidents, and then how have you adapted to it? You know, judgment-free. People aren't going, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to set out and traumatize myself. It's judgment-free. It's finding the reasons, and then we can like look at the nuts and bolts so that we can get onto a recovery trajectory. Because inner brutality and self-punishment will just make it worse and just keep it going. Which is why you still see people hurting 20 years later, right? Excuse me.
Can this change of narrative happen quickly, or is it incremental? Your experience?
It's incremental because it's about rewiring. So you can't rewire very quickly. You can make the decision quickly, but you can't rewire very, very quickly. I mean, it's not a forever thing, but it takes months, not hours. Some people say you can do, in my experience, and I'm trained in 3 different reprocessing techniques, I think some of those can work on some things. When your internal narrative is 30 years old, you're not going to solve that in 2 hours. You're just not. Because the default position in the brain will always go back to what it wants, what it needs, what it's used to, right? So to retrain it's going to take time. But once it's done forever. Yeah?
Once that insight, once that total kind narrative comes in, it's there. Obviously, there are external traumas that will happen on a continuous basis, but then you have those tools to kind of recalibrate yourself again.
Exactly. Once you are companionable to self, and that's the new neurological template, that's wired in, if you like, then it would take a lot to unwire that.
And then if it does, you've got those pathways, and if it does, you've got those pathways in place to re-tap into it again.
Exactly. So what you try to do is rewire it to the point where it's the new default, right? So that you don't go down that rabbit warren of self-hatred.
So it becomes like a personal, so it becomes like a personal manifesto, so to speak, rather than a group narrative that's being fed to you.
Well, the aim is to get it so habituated that you're not even thinking about it. Yeah. Just like you don't think, that's what habits are, right? They become instinctive and unconscious to us, to some degree. That's the level we want to wire it in. But of course, it takes time, and it is incremental. But it's a great project. I mean, it's the best, for me, it's the best job in the world to work with somebody about building a positive, I don't really like positive, but a companionable relationship with self.
Someone that you'd like to walk and talk and sleep with and eat with and use these microphones with as well.
Look, the truth of the matter is, if you live with yourself, right? So
I live with this microphone all the time.
Well, I can see it take over, wouldn't it?
It always does.
I mean, you didn't have that the last time we spoke.
Well, that's because I was much nicer and much more cordial previously. So, you know, the longer we go in this, the less, the more unsheathing we do.
It's like 3 people in the room, isn't it? In the virtual room, that is.
Well, this microphone doesn't say anything. It just does its job.
I should hope so. Clearly, you invested a lot in it.
Well, it wasn't new when I got it. but now it's wearing out.
Good. Hopefully you'll get a much more discreet one.
Never.
It nearly
Never,
is half
never.
your size, you know. But we're off track. We're talking about the microphone.
So yes, you know, it is worth going off track from the whole narrative that's pervasive at the moment, and then going off track onto your own companionship narrative.
Yeah, takes time, but it's
But you know, guys, you know, we are here. We are doing these videos on a weekly basis, and you know, it will take time. And the good news is that you can always reach out to us. We're on LinkedIn and mainly, and also on YouTube. So reach out, and we'll see you guys next week. Any other final words you'd like to say, Anna?
Just
apart from the microphone. Apart from the microphone.
Cool. No, do your damnedest to look after yourself, and that might mean reducing the content you're listening to or watching, consuming in any way. Just because that we only have a certain bandwidth, and that includes any subject at all. There's only so much we can take before the system starts to break down. That's a great, like, practical self-care. But I think we've said before, it would be so cool to make these interactive. And I thought it was lovely. You had some lovely comments on your LinkedIn post, intelligent insights. So we could, you know, great to chat more to people. But yeah, we're happy to answer or discuss anything really that's useful.
Yeah. We are open, and if there are any suggestions from the listeners how we can do that, we're more than happy to listen. Thank you, Anna, and see you next week.
Thank you very much. See you soon.